Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. April 24th, 2018.
The Kuhner Report is powered by Kelly Financial Services, cleaning up your financial bull. Get the peace of mind that you deserve at Kelly Financial Services.
Was the attack in Toronto a terrorist attack? Okay, my friends, we've got Rand Paul on for an exclusive Newsmaker interview at 1:05. You don't want to miss it. Jam-packed show for you today. But first, my friends, without question, the news of the moment is the horrible, atrocious attack that took place just north of the border in the great city of Toronto. Now, the question that everybody is asking, was this a terrorist attack, or was this the act of a mentally deranged individual? Here is exactly, my friends, the latest that we know so far. An individual by the name of Alec Minassian rented a Ryder truck. And then in the northern part of Toronto, in fact, I know that area extremely well. My wife, Grace, did her master's degree at the University of Toronto, so I would often visit her in TO. It is a great city. I know that area in particular very well. It is an ethnic hotspot. A lot of Chinese, Koreans, Iranians, a lot of people, very multicultural, very multi-ethnic. People were out on a beautiful day. It was a long winter. The sun was now coming out. It is a hub. A lot of people like to walk on the sidewalk. There are cafes, boutiques, restaurants. It's a really nice, humming part of Toronto. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Alec Minassian, who had rented a Ryder truck going at about 45, 50 miles an hour, then decided to take his truck and literally start driving on the pedestrian walkway, on the sidewalk. According now to multiple witnesses, he was deliberately mowing people down as he drove his truck. This was not an accident. This was not a case of him falling asleep at the wheel or whatever, getting a stroke or a seizure. They said he was driving extremely fast, very deliberately, and he tried to hit every person on that sidewalk. To the absolute horror of everybody there, person after person was being mowed down. They said you could hear screaming, yelling, pandemonium. Tables were smashed, poles were smashed, windows were smashed, bus shelters were smashed. He ran over everybody. A woman with a child in a stroller. They just saw the stroller fly into the air. A young girl was mowed down. In fact, she was hit so hard, she was knocked off her sneakers. Elderly women were mowed down. By the time the carnage was done, 10 have been confirmed dead. 15 are injured. However, the Toronto police are saying that the death toll is very likely to rise because many of those that are injured are in very severe critical condition. After this attack took place, once the van finally smashed into a building, the person driving the van, Alec Minassian, took out a gun and then began to run down Yonge Street. He ran for several blocks. The police chased him. They finally confronted him, and they were able to subdue and arrest the suspect without any shots being fired. And so immediately, the question that must be asked is, was this an Islamic terrorist attack? Was this a jihadist attack? Because like in New York City, like in France, like in England, like in Germany, ISIS has been telling their supporters to use or rent vans or trucks and then mow them down, use them as deadly weapons of mass destruction. And so immediately the thought was this was a case of international terrorism. However, Upon further inspection, the name already throws people off. It's Alec Minassian. It's an Armenian name. It's not a Muslim name. It's an Armenian name. For those of you that don't know anything about Armenia, it is 99.99% Christian. They have a few Kurds, they have a few Yazidis, but for the most part, the Armenians are not just Christians. They tend to be very devout Orthodox Christians. And so immediately, it didn't look like a case of jihadism or Islamic terrorism. The CTV News and the CBC began then to interview friends and classmates of Alec Minassian. Like Nicholas Cruz, like many of the shooters here in the United States, it turns out that Alec Minassian has been struggling with mental illness. He's apparently a very seriously mentally ill man. And so what you now have in Toronto is a mass killing, very similar to the mass shootings that we have had here in the United States, with the crucial difference being instead of an AR-15, they use a van. So the question now, to me, is it's one of the most important questions that we as a society are refusing to discuss. Because if you look at CNN, if you look at MSLFBC, if you look at the New York Times or the Boston Globe or whatever, the left in general, they are obsessed with weapons. That's what they obsess about over every mass murder or killing or shooting. It's always the weapon. The AR-15, so-called assault weapons, the Glocks, whatever it is. In London, it's the knife. Because knife attacks have been soaring. So maybe we need knife control. Maybe we need gun control. You guys want to have van control? I just want you to think about the logic of what these liberals are trying to tell us. What the attack in Toronto shows, to me definitively, is that there is something profoundly wrong taking place in Western society. And the issue is not the weapon. The left keeps obsessing over the weapon. To me, the bigger issue is the motivation, the reason why it's taking place. In other words, Canada has some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. It didn't prevent this massacre. By the way, how did he get a gun? But let that go, okay? Let that go. It still didn't prevent this massacre. It still didn't prevent massacres taking place using vans in France, in Germany, in England. They're now becoming the weapon of choice, either for mentally deranged people or for Islamic jihadists. So, you can't ban the guns, you can't ban the knives, you can't ban the cars, you can't ban the vans, you can't ban the rent-a-trucks, and instead of asking the obvious question, why? Why is this taking place? What is happening in American, Canadian, European, Western society that we are now seeing these incidences of mass murder taking place on a regular basis? Because decades ago, people had guns, but you didn't see these kind of mass shootings. When I was growing up, people had guns, but they weren't slaughtering each other in schools. When I grew up, people had, we rented a Ryder. We moved several times. We rented a Ryder truck. We never heard of somebody taking a Ryder truck and mowing people down. We had knives. We weren't stabbing each other gang style as they are in London right now. So it's not the knives that have changed. It's not the vans that have changed. It's not the guns that have changed. But it's something in our culture that's changed. And that's what people don't want to talk about. And there are several reasons. And if the left is not willing to have this discussion, I will. Because unlike the left, I'm not an ideologue. I'm here in the pursuit of the truth. And so, what is really taking place? Number one, and this is so obvious now, it is beyond debate. It's just beyond debate, but the left refuses to acknowledge it. We have a problem with mental illness. Our society is looking the other way. We are deliberately turning a blind eye to the growing problem of the mentally ill in our society. And it's whether in the United States, almost all of the mass school shooters were mentally ill, whether it's up in Canada, whether it's in France, in Norway, in Denmark, in Germany, in England. Many of these people perpetrating these kinds of attacks are mentally deranged, mentally ill, psychotic people. And yet our society refuses to treat them. Our society deliberately chooses, for fear of offending them, for fear of being politically incorrect, for fear of not being compassionate and tolerant and respect for diversity, we continue to ignore warning sign after warning sign after warning sign. And even though this guy, Alec Minassian, like Nicholas Cruz, was obviously a danger to his classmates, made all kinds of threatening comments, was clearly mentally ill, according to his neighbors, according to people who knew his family, according to people who went to school with him, nobody did anything. Like Nicholas Cruz, nobody did anything until it was too late. That, to me, is point number one. When are we going to address the issue of mental illness in our society? That, to me, is the key question. But let's drill even deeper. Why did this guy use a van? Because he was learning from examples set by others. You know, when you live in a multicultural society, and Toronto, if you've ever been there, is extremely multi-ethnic, multilingual, multiracial, multicultural. It's one of the most multicultural societies on earth. You learn from the example set by others. And all you have to do is see what ISIS has been doing in France, in England, in New York City, and suddenly the mentally ill say, aha, I don't need a gun to kill people. Look, they mow them down with vans or trucks. And so they start imitating what the jihadists have been perpetrating around the world. And then, to me, there is the ultimate point. And this now, my friends, there is no getting around this fact. Until we address this, there's going to be death by vans, death by knives, death by guns. It really doesn't matter. It is the fraying of our moral society. We have lost our moral core. We no longer teach our children right from wrong. We no longer teach them good from bad. We no longer instill moral absolutes. We no longer instill any sense of morality, of values, and of conscience. This is something that we used to do for thousands of years automatically, naturally. Now we no longer do this. We have taken God out of the schools. We have taken morality and religious faith out of the schools. We no longer teach what we used to teach, the 10 Commandments, basic respect for human life. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto you. That, my friends, has been completely purged from the public square. And so when you have a society that is highly multicultural, where you no longer want to impose any set of values upon anybody, where you no longer assimilate people, where you no longer stress a common language, a common culture, a common morality, common values, you're going to get more and more insane, lunatic people who are going to decide to do whatever they want to do. And if it means killing, they go ahead and kill, because we no longer value human life. Now, until we have this discussion about what is going on in our culture, here in Canada, in the Western world, until we discuss now the real dangers of multiculturalism, until we discuss the real problems of mental illness, take your weapon of choice. This is what I find incredible. The liberals now are actually pushing knife control in America following what's taking place in London. I want you to think about how insane this is. So in London, they're murdering each other at historic high rates, much higher than New York. The homicide rate is much higher now in London than in New York City. But they're killing each other with knives. More people have now been killed in van or truck attacks than by AR-15s. Let me repeat that. More people have now been killed by van or truck attacks than by AR-15s. So, whether it's Nicholas Cruz with an AR-15, whether it's Adam Lanza, whether it's knives, whether it's vans, whether it's Ryder trucks, people who want to commit evil are going to commit evil and murder. The question we're not asking is not forget the weapon. Why are so many people choosing to commit these heinous, evil, murderous acts in the ways that we didn't even 20 or 30 years ago? It's the culture. It's mental illness. It's the breakdown of morality. And until we discuss this, my friends, the killing is going to continue. The means by which they kill, it will change. It will be handguns. It will be assault weapons, AR-15s, knives, pipe bombs, vans, trucks, cars, whatever, rocks, stones, whatever they can get their hands on. It's not the weapon. It's the culture. 617-266-6868 is the number. Okay, let me ask you this. What is your reaction to the attacks in Toronto? 10 dead, 15 injured. Do you think there are any ties to terrorism? Or is this another deranged act by a mentally ill individual, this time using a Ryder rent-a-truck instead of an AR-15? 617-266-6868. Your calls next. 1228 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends, let me ask you. Another heinous attack, this time in Toronto, 10 dead, 15 injured, although the death toll may go up. The weapon of choice was not an AR-15, but a Ryder rent-a-truck. Do the actions in Toronto show that gun control is absolutely pointless? Toronto, Canada, some of the strictest gun control laws in the world. No problem. He got a van, 10 are dead. 617-266-6868. You can also text us to WRKO, whatever your message is, and then to 70470, 7470. This is a really good text from 978. Jeff, it's not just mental illness. This generation has no empathy. They have no social skills. Everything they watch and play on their devices are so violent, it's no big deal to them. Another one, 781. Jeff, I think one of the reasons there is now so much more violence is social media, the internet. It has a lot to do with what is going on in our society today. Interesting. Brenda in Waltham, you're up next. Go ahead, Brenda.
Yes. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
I just want to say, I have firsthand experience with mentally ill people. I have a person in my family who suffers from it, and they also married a person who has mental illness. And the two of them are as different as night and day. In general, the mentally ill community are not violent. There are some that can be violent, so it's very hard to know, initially anyway, if there could be violence. I think a paranoid person or someone who's very angry and paranoid can be capable of doing what happened in Toronto and also in Tennessee.
Well, you know, Brenda, you touched on something very profound, because I also have members in my family who suffer from mental illness, and it's mostly depression. And I feel very bad for them because they're just biochemical. It's like suffering from, I don't know, asthma or whatever, or type 1 diabetes. So they take their medication and they're 100% fine. They're happy. They lead very, rich, fulfilling lives. So I think mental illness is a catch-all phrase. I think what we really mean is paranoid schizophrenia. I think that's the real issue here, because you deal with people who are paranoid schizophrenic, and they're the ones who have a tendency to violence, especially if they're not supervised or medicated. And I think that honestly explains a lot. It explains Tennessee, very good point. It explains Parkland. It explains Adam Lanza. And I think it explains Toronto. And yet we don't want to talk about that. We're just obsessed with the guns, the weapons, the weapons, the weapons. We have to start talking about paranoid schizophrenia. Am I wrong, Brenda?
No, you're not wrong, but I think it's also not being completely correct. So I think people can be schizophrenic and not be violent as well.
Yes, I agree with you.
So it's a complicated topic and subject. But what you were speaking about the guns and the knives and now the vans. So if I want to go rent a Ryder truck or a U-Haul, I might have to go through a screening process first. I mean, that ridiculous thought goes through our minds. That's that's a ridiculous thing to think that you have to pass a test to see if you're, it's okay for you to rent a van.
You're dead on. You're dead on.
Silly.
Brenda, thank you. Thank you very much for that call. Look, it's a very complicated issue. I'm up against it, but let me just say this. When you have somebody who's severely mentally ill, usually paranoid schizophrenia, if they're exhibiting violent tendencies or making violent threats, don't turn a blind eye. And that's what we've been doing for too long. That's my point. Agree, disagree, more with your calls. Okay, my friends, senators are delaying a confirmation hearing for the president's VA secretary nominee, Dr. Ronnie Jackson. Evan Heidenrich has all the details. He's in the RKO newsroom. What are they, Evan?
Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel.
1239 here on the great WRKO. Okay, a horrific attack in Toronto. A deranged individual, Alec Minasian, takes a Ryder rent-a-truck and plows down, killing 10 people, injuring 15 more. And so far, they say there is no connection to international terrorism. It looks like another incident of mental illness run amok. My question to you is this. Are we obsessing too much on guns, AR-15s, and not looking at the deeper cultural problems responsible for what's taking place here in Canada and across Western Europe? 617-266-6868. Does the Western world have a gun problem, or does it have a culture problem? Andy in Nebraska, you're up next. Go ahead, Andy.
Dobry den, Jeff.
Hey, Andy, how are you, my friend?
I'm excellent. How are you?
Good, good.
Back.
It's great to be back. Thank you, Andy. I had a nice vacation.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So first point, we only started seeing these mass shootings and other crimes by mentally ill people after the deinstitutionalization movement, pushed by who? Oh, the gun-grabbing Democrats. Second, did you hear they're actually passing knife control in the British Parliament? I could not make this up.
No, you're right, Andy. They are. They think knives are the problem. I mean, it's unbelievable.
How on earth? Sorry, Jeff, am I going insane? Are we insane at this? Because how the hell is this going to work? You think all the Muslim invaders in the UK are going to give a damn about the laws?
Well, that's the other point.
They don't give a damn about the laws in Canada. They don't give a damn about the laws here.
Andy, look, that's the obvious point, and thank you for that call. Look, if you want to kill somebody, if you're determined to kill somebody, no law is going to stop you. So you can try to, control knives, control guns. What do you want, a 7-day, waiting period before you rent a Ryder truck now? I mean, I'm serious. Is that what we're going to have to start doing? I mean, the problem is not the weapons. Since time immemorial, people find whatever they can use to kill somebody. What is changing, and what nobody wants to confront is, look, I'm telling you, okay? Growing up in the 70s and 80s, nobody drove a van onto a crowded sidewalk. Nobody did that. Not in Canada, not in America, not in Europe. Nobody did that. Nobody took an AR-15 and just started shooting up a school. So it's not the technology that's changed. Or take London. London, people, they had knives in the 70s and 80s. They weren't going around knifing each other and shanking each other as they are now in London. So it's not that the vans have changed or the guns have changed or the knives have changed. Something about people, our culture has changed. And yet we're not willing to acknowledge that, to even discuss it, to even mention it, for fear of offending some group or other. And so I'm just looking at it objectively. What's changed? The rise of the internet. No question about it. Now, I use the internet. I like the internet, but there's a dark side to the internet. You've got social media. You've got kids addicted now, growing up literally addicted to these machines. These violent video games where they're living in virtual reality. You have parents now increasingly absent from the home. Either they're all working all the time, or there's been the breakdown of the family, whatever it's been, you don't see the same kind of parenting as you used to. And I think also, my friends, look, we're lying to ourselves if we don't confront this. Our morality has changed. It has. It just has. So we're no longer teaching good from evil, right from wrong, moral absolutes. There used to be prayer in school. There used to be religious instruction in school. That's gone. God is dead. God is gone. And what's the common culture that holds us together? What are the common values? What are the common moral beliefs that hold us together? So I mentioned Toronto. And I thought Mark Stein, by the way, on this has been brilliant because Toronto's his hometown. The one thing that strikes you about Toronto, which increasingly strikes me about life in the United States, is when you go to Toronto, and I know that area in particular, there's a little Chinatown, there's a little Koreatown, there's a little Iran town, and it's not like the Chinatowns that we used to have. What I mean is they only speak Chinese. They only speak Korean. They only speak whatever. They only speak Armenian. I'm just using that because his name is Armenian. In other words, they're becoming radically Balkanized. And so there's almost nothing holding people together anymore. There is no common language. There is no common culture. There is no common morality. There are no common values. Something that we used to naturally do as a society. Assimilate people. Socialize people. Teach them that they're supposed to be good citizens. That's gone. It's fraying. It's crumbling. It's disintegrating. And in that vacuum is this nihilism, this belief in nothingness, this absence of morality. And I think that's why you're getting so many more, whether it be school shootings, whether it be knife attacks, whether it be vans or trucks. I'm leaving aside radical Islam because a lot of it is radical Islam. But take away radical Islam, you still have look, we've got school shootings in the United States. Here, the Waffle House shooting. Here's another lunatic who just for the hell of it, mentally ill, it's all coming out now, severely mentally ill, wanted to kill the president. The Secret Service did. They seized his guns. The father gives him back his guns. And this guy drives up essentially naked with a green jacket and starts popping off people at a Waffle House for no reason whatsoever, because he thinks it's fun. Now, the guns haven't changed. I had Waffle Houses when I grew up. Nobody walked up to a Waffle House and started shooting people. So something is wrong. And we're not confronting the underlying roots or dynamics. Right away, the media goes, boom, guns. Kamala Harris, right away. Waffle House, you got 4 dead, the bodies aren't even cold. Kamala Harris, assault weapons do not belong in a civilized country. That's what she said. And she's going to use that as the launching pad for her run for the presidency in 2020. They're obsessed with the guns. So, by her, what? Vans don't belong in a civilized country? Knives don't belong in a civilized country? I mean, just think about it. Pipes don't belong in a civilized country? Pressure cookers don't belong in a civilized country? It's insane. Because they don't want to deal with the culture that they helped to create. So what they want to do is blame the weapons. Don't blame the weapons. Blame the people, the politicians, and the culture who created this mess. 617-266-6868. Is it Alicia? Okay, Alicia in Whitman. Thanks for holding and welcome.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Alicia?
Well, I'm doing good, but I wanted to comment that I agree with you totally that the schools have absolutely lost their minds. My son is 16. He goes to a local tech school, and despite the fact he never actually spoke to this girl that was near him, someone else did, they want to blame him for sexual harassment. He spoke to the boy who did it just beforehand, and when the boy got caught, claimed my son told him to. They have no proof my son did anything. They refuse to give me any proof my son did anything. And yet they're telling me they want to suspend him for a day, and they want to give him 18 weeks of sexual harassment sensitivity training, which I told them to stick it. They weren't giving him anything. I didn't believe it. My son claims he said nothing. He has no idea what's going on. The crux of the whole thing is that the boy that's accusing him, I hate to put it this way, but he's mentally handicapped. My son did what the school tells them to. He didn't want to ostracize him. There were kids that were picking on him. He befriended him. They're in a shop where there's explosive gas. For starters, they're telling me my son, despite the fact he kept shutting the gas off for this kid and covering for him, for some god-awful reason one day just decided he was going to make this kid sexually harass a girl and believes that that's the reason why this boy did it. If he can't make his own decisions about something like that, what is he doing working with explosive gas? My son is now being targeted. They want to give him this suspension. I told him to stick the suspension. They weren't doing it. I told them if they tried, I was going to come to school and pick him up. He wasn't serving it, especially when they can't give me any indication of what he actually did. I'm not going to let them punish my kid because they said so. That's ridiculous.
You know, Alicia, so by the way, they want him, 18 weeks? Sexual harassment training? 18 weeks?
That's what they told me. They said approximately, that was the word, approximately 18 weeks. And apparently it's based on the fact that in this school, they get a grant for some sexual harassment committee. And this situation apparently suited that committee, so they're coming after my son. And that's
almost 5 months.
Yeah, exactly.
They're crazy.
They're out of their mind.
Alicia, look, when I was growing up in Canada, now, I don't know, maybe it was different for you, but I remember when we grew up, the problem children, the more violent children, some of them who may have had serious mental issues, they were always put in a separate classroom from everybody else.
Not anymore.
They've changed that.
Well, the kid isn't violent, and he apparently, he's just only mildly autistic, is what I'm told. So he's not, he doesn't hurt anybody or anything else, but he's had a long-standing history with this one girl in the class, making lewd comments to her, asking her on dates, things of that nature. And I think the girl finally had it that day because he did it in front of other students, who then clapped him on the back, said, "Oh, great, you're doing a wonderful job," all this nonsense. So the boy, was like, "Hey, that's great." But once the girl got upset, he pointed at my son and said, "He told me to."
Incredible.
Now the school, right, my son never spoke to this girl, never looked at this girl, never had anything to do with this girl. They already have the sexual harassment written in his file, which I've demanded that it be removed. I tried to see a lawyer. No one wants to handle it without money up front, so that takes care of that. It's me against them. That's all there is. And my son can't defend himself because they won't give him the tools to do it. by taking away his rights, basically. By the way, this school also told me in another incident that once my son enters their doors, I lose my parental rights. I'm no longer a parent.
They told you that?
Yes. My son had an issue with a kid that he had an argument with. They have an anonymous tip line where kids apparently are allowed to make comments about other children, and they just follow up on them. The kid claimed my son had a knife. My son had no knife. Matter of fact, get this, a 60-year-old woman administrator frisked my 15-year-old son without my permission, without me being in the room. They didn't even call me. My son called me in tears because the woman grazed his anatomy that she shouldn't have touched. She had her hands up his pant legs.
Alicia, are you? You don't have to give me the school, but is it a public school?
No. Yeah, it's a public school.
Alicia, you got to get your boy out of that school.
I'm considering it. Yeah.
You have to. No, Alicia, please. I mean, don't consider it. Get him out of there.
I met with this woman who frisked him and said, what did you do? What's going on? She gave me some speech about having to protect other students based on this fake allegation of a knife. Coincidentally, the kid who made this allegation did identify himself on this recording, and they knew that my son had a problem with this kid. They knew it, and they still did it anyway.
Alicia, you got it. Just please do me a favor. Get your boy out of that school. Send him to another public school if you have to. Better yet, you can take a religious school, a parochial school, a charter school, whatever, but get him out of that school.
It's ridiculous, though, isn't it? This is an indication of how crazy they've gone.
No, our culture's gone insane. I mean, you're completely right. And Alicia, I'm up against it, but thank you very much. Look, and that's my point. That's my point. But nobody wants to address this because the easy thing to do is blame the guns. Or blame the weapon. Well, it's not the weapon. I'm telling you, it's not. Ask them up in Toronto if guns are the problem. 617-266-6868. More with your calls. Next.
WRKO.
George in Walpole, you're up next. Thanks for holding and welcome. Hello, George. Did we lose George? Okay, let's go to Steve in Hyde Park. Steve, you're up next. Thanks for holding and welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. Listen, Jeff, I kind of got to blame the pharmaceutical companies here in a way, and a lot of the child psychologists. When I was younger, I had, I'm in my 60s now, but they diagnosed me, because I had hyperactivity. I was a hyperactive kid when I was a kid. And they wanted to and this is a few years ago, they wanted to put me on medication to slow me down. And my father and mother absolutely said, no way. But as I was growing up and watching other kids, their parents were letting them take these drugs, Prozac and all these other drugs. And they were giving it to kids in first, second, and third grade, because all the kid was hyperactive. There wasn't nothing mentally wrong with him. They were just hyperactive. And a lot of these kids now, they don't get to go outside and play. They sit behind the computer and play video games. Well, what happens long term with these drugs that they're giving these kids? They have no idea, Jeff. These drugs would maybe a couple of years in the making. They do a couple of pretrial things, and then they start giving them to kids. And then the doctors, all the child psychologists, and all the doctors go right along with it because they say, oh, these are safe. These will calm the kid down. He'll relax. He won't be so hyperactive. He'll be able to concentrate in school. But what do these drugs do long term, Jeff? Nobody knows. Now all of a sudden, these kids are 20 years old and they're shooting people. They're sitting at home watching video games and they think, okay, I'm going to go out and shoot up a Waffle House. I would be willing to bet that if they took a look back at all of these kids that are and people that are shooting up people that aren't terrorists, that are just shooting up people for the hell of it, they're going to find out these kids have been on some of these drugs.
Steve, I commend you for your courage. I agree with you. I think the pharmaceutical companies have a responsibility. I think these video game makers have a responsibility because now we're living through an epidemic. And this has been in the pipeline, and now we're starting to reap the whirlwind. Okay, my friends, coming up next, exclusive newsmaker interview with Senator Rand Paul. You don't want to miss it. Don't touch that dial.
The voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 100.7 WZLX HD2 Boston, an iHeart radio station.